The mountain did not care about Elias Cole. That was why he loved it. It did not ask questions. It did not offer condolences. It did not look at him the way people in town looked at him, with that particular tilt of the head, that soft pulling at the corners of the mouth that passed for sympathy but felt more like an autopsy. The mountain simply stood. It breathed cold air and grew old trees and let the wind do what wind does. And Elias, in return, did what he did every morning. He moved through the silence like a man who had made peace with disappearing. He rose before light. Boots first. Always boots first. His wife used to laugh at that, used to say he'd put his boots on before his soul each morning, and he'd smiled because she wasn't wrong. He fed the wood stove. He boiled water. He stood at the window with a tin cup pressed between both palms and watched the darkness over the peaks turn from black to the particular bruised purple that came just before dawn. A crow landed on the fence post outside. He did not look at it. It did not look at him. They understood each other perfectly. His name had once meant something in the valley below. Elias Cole, the man who built things, fixed things, who showed up when neighbors needed a roof patched or a road cleared. A man with a wife who grew sunflowers in window boxes and a laugh like a bell somebody had knocked off a shelf. A man who was going to be a father. That man had not come down the mountain in 4 years. The cabin held its secrets the way old wood holds water. Silently, deeply, without announcement. If you looked carefully, you could read the entire story of Elias Cole in the objects arranged around that single room. A woman's coat still hanging by the door, caramel-colored wool, a small tear at the left pocket she'd always meant to mend. He had meant to take it down 100 times. He never did. On the wall near the stove, a child's drawing, crayon on white paper, slightly yellowed now. A house, 2 large figures, and between them a tiny one, round-headed and grinning. A sun in the corner with exaggerated rays. The child who drew it had been a neighbor's boy, 6 years old, who had given it to them at a dinner party when they'd told everyone the news. The news. He didn't say the word. Not even in his own mind. He walked past it the same way he walked past the door at the end of the short hallway, the one that stayed closed. Not locked. He had never locked it. Locking it would have implied he intended to keep something out. He just didn't open it. He kept his hand from the handle the way you keep your tongue from a broken tooth, by sheer, practiced, daily discipline. 7 years. 7 winters on this mountain. He had come up here to grieve and had simply stayed. The grief had not left, but it had changed shape. It had become the walls. It had become the routine. It had become the silence that he wore now like a second skin, fitted and familiar and entirely his. He was not unhappy. He told himself this regularly. He was not unhappy. He was finished. He heard it just after 9 in the morning. Not wind. Wind he knew, every register of it, every pitch and mood. This was something else. A sound from the direction of the access road, the narrow gravel track that switchbacked down the eastern face of the mountain. He'd built a barrier across it the second year, a simple wooden gate with a hand-painted sign. Private. No access. Most people respected it. Hikers occasionally did not. He put on his coat and went out. The morning was iron gray, the sky low and heavy with the kind of clouds that don't bluff. He followed the fence line to where the access road curved around a stand of pines and dropped steeply toward the ravine. He smelled it before he saw it, the sharp chemical bite of a ruptured fuel line. The car was on its side in the ravine. A small silver sedan, one wheel still turning slowly against nothing. It had gone through the barrier, his barrier, and tumbled 20 feet down the embankment before catching on an outcropping of rock. The driver's side window was a shatter. Steam rose from the crumpled hood. Elias was already moving. He half ran, half slid down the embankment, grabbing at roots and jutting stone to slow himself. He reached the passenger side, now facing upward like an open mouth, and peered in. She was conscious. That was the first thing. Her eyes were open and they found his immediately, dark and enormous and burning with a fear that had nothing to do with the crash. She was young, late 20s maybe, with her dark hair matted against her face and both hands pressed hard against the swollen, impossible curve of her belly. She gasped. I need you to. A contraction took her. Her whole body clenched. She made a sound that was not a scream. It was something older than a scream, something that came from a place below language. "I've got you," Elias said. He didn't know why he said it. The words came up from somewhere he'd sealed off years ago. "I've got you. Can you move?" She nodded. She was already trying. Her name, he would learn, was Maya. He got her up the embankment. He did not ask how. His body simply did it. The same body that had gone numb and mechanical 7 years ago now operated on something purer than thought. He carried most of her weight. She gripped his arm with a strength that surprised him. By the time they reached the cabin, she was shaking, her breathing ragged, her contractions coming every 8 minutes. He put her on the bed, his bed, the only bed, and went to get water and towels and the first aid kit he kept more out of habit than hope. When he came back, she was watching the door. Not the ceiling, not her hands. The door, as if calculating the distance. "You're safe," he said. She looked at him the way someone looks at a sentence they're trying to translate. "Who lives here with you?" she asked. "No one." Her eyes moved to the woman's coat by the door. "No one," he said again, quieter. She didn't push, but she also didn't fully relax. He noticed the way she positioned herself slightly toward the wall, slightly angled away from him. He noticed and he understood it and he said nothing. He put the water on the stove and gave her space. She had a phone, a cheap one, the kind with no case, no photos, nothing personal on it. When he offered to call someone, she shook her head too quickly. "There's no signal up here anyway," he said, and watched something in her face. Not relief, exactly, but close. The bruise on her left wrist was 4 days old. He could tell by the color. Yellow at the edges, deepening to violet at the center, shaped like fingers. He had seen that shape before on other women in another life when he used to be the kind of man who showed up. He didn't say anything about the bruise. He simply moved to the window, checked the sky, and felt the bottom of his stomach drop slightly. The clouds had descended. The wind had the particular metallic taste of incoming snow. They had maybe 3 hours before the mountain closed itself off entirely. 3 hours, and Maya's contractions were now every 6 minutes. There is a specific kind of intimacy that only emergency creates. It bypasses all the normal architecture of human connection, the small talk, the careful disclosure, the mutual audition of trust, and goes directly to the marrow. By the time the storm arrived, rattling the cabin windows and erasing the tree line in white, Elias and Maya had been through 3 hours of it. He had held a wet cloth to her forehead. She had gripped his wrist during contractions and let go each time. With a murmured apology, he waved off with a shake of his head. "Talk," she said at one point between contractions. "About anything. Just talk." He almost said he didn't do that anymore. Instead, he said, "There's a pair of ravens that nest in the spruce on the north side. Same pair, 7 years. I've watched them every spring. Do they mate for life?" "Yes." A pause. "That must be lonely," she said. "If one dies." He was quiet for a long moment. "I imagine it's quieter," he said. "Not necessarily lonelier." She looked at him carefully. What happened? He could have deflected. He had deflected this question in various forms for 7 years. But there was something about the storm and the small room and the woman in his bed with her ancient, exhausted eyes that made deflection feel like a lie he no longer had the energy to maintain. "My wife," he said. "She was pregnant. Complications. The kind they don't catch until it's too late." He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I was in the room. I couldn't." He stopped again. "The baby didn't survive either. A girl. We had a name picked out." Maya had gone very still. "We had a room ready," he said. "And a name. And a drawing on the wall." He nodded toward the crayon paper by the stove. "I came up here after. I just never went back down." The silence stretched. Then Maya reached out and covered his hand with hers. Her fingers were cold. He didn't move. "Her name," Maya said softly. "What was it?" Before he could answer, headlights swept across the window. 2 beams through the white curtain of snow. Then an engine cutting off. Then the sound of boots on the porch. Maya's hand pulled back from his. Fast. The color left her face. Elias stood. 3 knocks. Heavy. Deliberate. The knock of someone who expects the door to open. He looked at Maya. She was sitting upright, her jaw set, but her eyes were doing what eyes do when the body remembers something the mind is still trying to process. They were wide and locked and somewhere else entirely. "Don't," she whispered. He opened the door. There were 2 of them. The one in front was perhaps 40, clean-shaved, wearing a good jacket, the kind of jacket that cost money and was meant to show it. He had the handsome, practiced face of someone who had learned early that a smile could function as a threat. He smiled now. "Evening," he said, looking past Elias into the cabin. "I'm looking for my wife." He said it the way someone says I'm looking for my car. The same ownership. The same certainty of retrieval. Elias did not move from the doorway. "Nobody here," he said. The man's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Her phone pinged this tower 3 hours ago." He tilted his head. "I just want to make sure she's safe." From inside the cabin, a sharp, indrawn breath. "Maya," a contraction catching her mid-silence. The man's smile widened. He put one hand on the doorframe. "I'll just come in and—" "No," Elias said. It happened fast. The way real things always happen. Not like the movies, no preamble, no choreography. The man pushed. Elias was bigger than he looked and his feet were planted and he didn't move. The second man, younger, nervous, wearing a bad expression, came around from the side, and then there was the shape of something in his hand. Elias had grown up on this mountain. He had hunted it for 30 years. He had set traps and tracked animals and once wrestled a dog away from a bear with his bare hands because the dog belonged to someone he loved. He had also, for 7 years, had absolutely nothing left to lose. That last part made all the difference. He took the weapon from the younger man before anyone in the room had fully processed that he'd moved. It clattered across the porch boards and disappeared into the snow. Then Elias straightened and looked at the man with the good jacket with an expression that was perfectly, terribly calm. "You're going to walk back to that truck," Elias said. "Both of you." The man's manufactured composure flickered. He looked at his companion, who was cradling his wrist and reassessing every choice that had led him to this porch. Then he looked back at Elias. "This isn't over," he said. "Walk," Elias said. They walked. The headlights came back on. The truck reversed down the access road, its taillights bleeding red into the storm. Elias stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the dark. Then one of the taillights stopped. He turned and went inside. Maya was on the bed, past the point of managing it quietly. Her face had changed. The guarded, translating expression was gone entirely, replaced by something ancient and involuntary. Her body had made a decision without her, the way bodies do, the way life insists on itself even when the moment is wrong and the place is impossible and the man kneeling beside her is a stranger who hasn't spoken to another human being in 4 years. "Elias," she said. And the fact that she used his name, the fact that he'd told her his name at some point in those hours and she had held on to it, undid something in him. "I'm here," he said. His hands were moving. He didn't decide to move them. They simply moved, gathering what he needed, doing what needed to be done, and he understood with a kind of quiet devastation that this was what his hands had always been for. Not to freeze. Not to hang at his sides in a hospital room, useless with grief. This, now. The storm screamed outside. The stove threw orange light. Elias Cole knelt beside a woman he had known for 5 hours and he worked with everything he had. And when it was almost done, when the impossible, stubborn, insistent fact of new life was nearly in his hands, he heard himself say a word, barely audible, a whisper that had waited 7 years to become sound. A name, the name they had chosen. The name he had never said out loud because saying it out loud would have made her real, and making her real would have made the loss of her something his body could not survive. He said it now, into the cold and the fire-lit dark. He said it like a door finally opening. She came into the world at 2:17 in the morning, in a cabin on a mountain that didn't care about anything, and she cried immediately. A clear, furious, magnificent sound that seemed to physically expand the walls of the room. Elias had her. Both hands. Solid and warm and terrifyingly, heartbreakingly alive. He lifted her, and she was the smallest thing he had ever held and the heaviest thing he had ever held, and he was not prepared. He would never have been prepared for the way that weight felt. Like an answer to something. Like the end of a very long sentence. Maya reached for her, and he passed her over, and he sat back on his heels. His face was wet. He didn't know when that had started. The baby had stopped crying. She was making small, exploring sounds now, blinking at the orange light with the particular bewilderment of someone who has just arrived somewhere and is still deciding how to feel about it. Maya held her against her chest and looked down at her with an expression that had no name in any language, and the cabin was very quiet, and outside the storm was beginning, just barely, to exhaust itself. Elias sat on the floor of his own cabin and could not move and did not want to move. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the woman's coat by the door. He looked at the crayon drawing on the wall, the tiny round-headed figure between two larger ones, the exaggerated sun. The first gray light of morning began to press against the windows. He let it in. The helicopter came on the third day, when the snow had compacted enough for the landing. There were authorities. There were forms. There was a conversation about the two men and what had happened on the porch and what came before it. And Maya answered every question with the steadiness of someone who had decided, somewhere in the middle of a snowstorm, that she was done being afraid. The bruise had faded slightly. Her voice had not. The baby was healthy. Impossibly, stubbornly, entirely healthy. In the weeks that followed, Elias was mostly left alone, which was, after all, what he had always wanted. He received one letter, handwritten, with a city postmark he didn't recognize. Maya told him that the baby's middle name was a name she had heard him whisper in the dark. She said she hoped that was all right. She said that some debts could not be paid but could be carried, and she intended to carry this one well. He read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it and put it with the crayon drawing. On a morning in late April, with the snow pulling back from the lower elevations and the ravens beginning their annual argument in the North Spruce, Maya came back. Not to stay. She was building something new, somewhere warmer, somewhere that had never held the shape of someone who hurt her. But she had wanted to see the mountain one more time. She stood on the porch with her daughter, 8 weeks old now, with her mother's dark eyes and no opinion yet on anything, and she looked at Elias. "What will you do?" she asked. "Now?" He looked at the mountain, the peaks he had memorized, the light he could read like a language, the silence that had kept him and kept him and kept him until it had become a kind of slow disappearing. Then he looked at the road. He went inside. He took the crayon drawing off the wall, gently, the way you take something you've decided to carry, and he folded it once along the center and slid it into his breast pocket. He took the caramel-colored coat from the hook by the door. He held it for a moment. Then he hung it back up. He put on his own coat. He picked up a bag he had not packed in 4 years. He came back out onto the porch and stood in the April light and looked at the valley below, where roads ran between towns and towns held people and people were, despite everything, despite all available evidence, worth the risk of knowing. He was not unafraid. He was not healed exactly. He didn't believe in exact healing, the kind that left no mark. He was simply finished being finished. The ravens called from the North Spruce. He finally looked up at them. Then Elias Cole walked down the mountain.